Welcome to our second episode in our Homestead Economics series for 2021's.
Looking back in 2021.
Yeah. Today, I think we're kind of going to take you through, this is very, very brief, very just matter-factual on all of our larger livestock. Basically,
yeah, we're kind of going to go through the horses, the cows, and the pigs, and sort of break that down a little bit. Spoiler alert, most of this is a loss, but
most of it?
but we'll
all of it's a loss.
We'll kind of go through that as we go through each of the pieces.
Exactly. Anybody that follows our channel does know the story behind this. We no longer have the cows, we no longer have the pigs, but it still is in our what it costs to run the homestead for 2021. So I think the easiest part to start with is probably the horses, because it's just a matter-factual number.
Yeah, and the horses, of course, are one of those things that, as of right now, they don't quote-unquote bring anything. We're not using them for anything at the moment.
But we have high hopes.
And future, that could really change this. So keeping the cost in mind. Now, also, we started the year with 2 larger horses. Obviously, we lost one of them in the spring. Then we went down to 1 horse for a while. And then, of course, this fall, we brought 2 smaller ponies
onto the scene.
So this is not... There's no real good way to break this down. So we're just going to give you the number.
Yeah. So basically, this included grains, beet pulp, hay, and shavings for the barn. We were $1,545.99 to feed the horses, whichever way you want to look at it.
Want to break that down.
That was throughout the whole year. Definitely a number that could be improved on, but we're really not going to touch too more on it in this video because it really isn't something we can figure at the moment until we get into a settled...
Well, and the nice part with the horses is it's basically a fixed cost, because unless you change something, add a horse, remove a horse, whatever,
it's pretty much across the board.
They're not quote-unquote producing, so that number is staying pretty constant, which is really good from a planning perspective.
Exactly. You know what you've got coming, kind of.
And hopefully when we look back at 2022, maybe we'll actually be able to say that, aside from the manure component, which is important, we're not assigning a value to that. Aside from that component, maybe they can actually, quote-unquote, pull their weight a bit.
Well, and we do have a plan for them, and I do think this year there's going to be a lot more pasturing time for them because there is no cows for competition, no pigs for competition. Basically, they're just going to follow along behind the sheep to clean up what's left and have their own little pasture space on an electric fence. So watch this space. Hopefully we get that developed. But that is the plan to save us some money in the 2022 year.
So next, we're going to talk about the cows. The cow endeavor started in 2020.
Yes, we got our 2 cows in November of 2020. 2020.
And then, of course, that spills over. Now, kind of spoiler alert for those who haven't been following us, the cows that we had never produced anything. They came as heifers and left as heifers. However,
They did give us a whole learning experience.
Yes, and
learning is priceless.
So we're going to break that down because they left in
August. Yeah, it was almost the end of August.
So we didn't even have them here on the farm for a full year. And what was the cost for the cows?
Well, again, grains, beet pulp, hay, and shavings because they were kept in the barn. We did run them back every night for the most part. Anyways, they were $1,867.63 for 2 cows. We actually 2 heifers. We actually did have 3. We had a young Jersey calf, Daisy. Daisy never got factored into this because she had calf starter, and then we started her on her calf replacement. But we basically ended up selling Daisy right after she was weaned and on her calf starter.
When we made the decision that cows weren't for us. So I think the big thing with the cows was, I mean, at face value, that doesn't sound like much compared to it's only slightly more than the horses. However, there are other costs that we didn't even get to for things like equipment, and they were still heifers.
Yeah, I mean, there was no extra feed going into them because they were milking or because they were in calf or feeding a young calf. There wasn't any of that yet.
And we hadn't got to logistics of doing AI, which for the breed we had wasn't an option. but even to outcross them or having a bull or renting a bull or this doesn't include any of that. So the reason the cows went was the price is pretty high because that's not even a full year compared to the horse cost. And I mean, the horses by weight were bigger. The two full-size horses are quite a bit bigger than the cows. I guess we could see the writing on the wall in the current unstable, I'm going to say, volatile environment that is the 2020s, which is everything that's going on. It was kind of like, this is not a good time
for us to be running in a negative for what it was.
And we did some figuring. We're not even going to get into that right now. We're just going to leave it at this. But we did some extrapolating based on some of those figures and looking out and factoring other costs of, like I say, purchasing, getting them bred, having extra animals.
Well, and you still got butcher fees on top of that. You've got all that sort of stuff.
And it became economically unfeasible. Yeah. Really, there was other factors, but economics just...
And yes, there were ways. I mean, I'm only going to go into just a smidgen on this. But, for example, for the 2 cows for the year, we spent $1,107 on hay. And that could have been lessened in expense by maybe doing round bales, but at the same time the machinery that we would had to have and keep running in order to do the round bales wasn't feasible either. It was just expense upon expense that just kind of, it works for some people and that's great.
It just wasn't going to work for our situation. Trying to build this up from scratch.
And again, and this is going to come up again in this video when we talk about the pigs, but unless that was your main focus and all you were going to do, it really didn't make sense for us to do it on a small scale. You either had to go, I'm going to say whole hog, even though that's not till later.
Whole cow.
Whole cow. You had to go all in, or it just didn't seem feasible to limp along.
And on 38 acres, we also asked ourselves the question, even if you could produce X amount of gallons of milk, and you could sell beef and this, that, whenever, was it really going to balance out in the end? And we just kind of said, for a few other reasons, no. So pretty much that ends the
topic of cows.
The topic of cows, and we will move into the last topic, which I think is a little more complicated. I mean, the horses, fixed cost. Cows, I'm going to say it, quite a hefty cost.
Hefty, but at least the cows was very stable in the sense that if you had a herd of 4 heifers, you knew basically the most you were going to get was 4 offspring. So you could budget a little bit on what your expenses were going to be. And I think that's where we had that moment of realization with the pigs was you went from 3 pigs to 14 pigs very fast.
Mm-hmm. And sort of what that can do, what that
does to the budget is pretty impressive. Pigs.
Let's move into talking about the kunekune pigs. Now, again, they came after a lot of thought, deliberation, etc. They came to the farm in 2020 as well.
Yep.
They were actually a little earlier. They were here longer than the cows.
Yeah, we got them in May of 2020.
And we basically grew them up from kind of weaner age right through a breeding cycle, which brought us into the summer of 2021.
You want the numbers?
Yes, we'll go with the numbers and then we'll...
And to be honest, the one thing I will say is I'm about to say this number is it's not a bad number. So we will explain a bit further on just where we're coming from on this. But the pigs in total, this included grain and beet pulp, because we also mixed grain and beet pulp in with the pig pellets just to make it go a little bit further. And hay, we spent $1,269 on the pigs this year. Now, the pigs also were on pasture. They almost had more pasture than the cows did. So
it did help. But the one thing we did find, without to digress for a moment, where we live in the world, it wasn't enough.
No.
The kunekunes, compared to other pigs, which we have raised, are amazing users of pasture. But I would suggest, from our experience, it has to be good pasture, and you have to have it pretty much year-round.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you don't have the pasture, they basically kind of became like any other pig. Mm-hmm. Trying to keep them full with the added the added issue of also trying to not have them get obese, which the beet pulp factored quite heavy into that because although they would eat hay, they weren't happy with it. Let's just put it that way. So that total is kind of technically dispersed over one boar, which we will say this. The
boar was so
kunekune was amazing.
Nothing. When he had pasture.
There was a period of about 2.5, almost 3 months where there was points where we would go with food and he wouldn't come looking for it. Now that was on a 2-acre
and he grew
pasture.
Amazing, like
Yes,
in size.
he grew amazing on it, but we still had the same problem when that pasture stopped growing. So very thrifty that way, and we will say, to be honest, the kunekunes are exactly as advertised. Now, in addition to the boar, we also had 2 sows, and they both had a litter. So we ended up with 10 piglets and 10 live piglets in total.
Yeah.
And really, we're not going to break it down, but the cost per pound to raise those piglets out, extrapolated, because we didn't see this through, because again, we kind of looked at a few variables and made a similar decision to the cows, actually wasn't that bad.
No, it ended up working out to be about $2.30 a pound is what it would have cost us. We basically projected this basing it on what it cost us to feed the original trio up till the first year, because they didn't breed until they were a year old. So we had the economic numbers of what they ate for that first year of their life. So we just kind of projected that towards what the piglets would have been, to then give us a rough idea, basing it on, say, 100 pounds a pig. And, very, very, very inexpensive quality meat to raise out.
That's an extremely thrifty pig.
Yes.
There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The problem is the breeding stock price tags. Now, we were lucky, and we did manage to get
we got a great deal on our sows.
A pretty decent deal. But where this started to fall apart was in looking at things sustainably, or at least our version of sustainable. It's nice to have a buffer. So the reality of it is kunekunes are still pretty rare. We feel that they exemplify some bigger issues, because if everybody had a pair, you could raise very reasonably priced meat, and you would always have access to basically other stock, right? Because when your pair reaches, I'm just going to say 4 years, and they kind of start to slow down in their production, you'd have the ability at that point to save a piglet from one of their litters, the sows, and then you need to find a boar. Well, the current economics of that adds approximately $350 a year, so over that 3 years, to your cost of raising those pigs. And the other thing is, you're not necessarily guaranteed the sales, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, you can sell wieners, etc., etc. It's not a guarantee. So while you could consume likely all of the piglets from a litter, you'd still have to go outsourcing those boars, and then you become dependent, and the economics just doesn't work anymore.
And with the pigs, in order to do that, even if you did 2 boars and 2 sows, you were still creating 10 to 15 piglets a year, and that's saying minimum. Only breeding once, minimum, and that just was more than we could use and consume, and
it quickly becomes a logistical nightmare.
Housing them all that. There was just a lot of things that just,
while the pasture space, as we said about the boar, while they're very good users of it, he was eating nothing on basically 2 acres. So when you start upping the population, it basically the kunekunes, not that this video is about this, but the kunekunes show you it's like in a natural population, that omnivore can't be a significant part of the ecosystem, because it will use more resources than some of the other parts, i.e. some of the grazers and whatnot.
Anyways,
we're gonna leave the pig stuff there. If anybody wants to talk about it more, we can go into it. But our journey raising kunekune pigs is basically at an end. So that's the hard, fast numbers. Kind of on that note, everything in this video, we're gonna call it a loss, because nothing brought in. No,
we didn't butcher any. We didn't bring in any. None of them were milked. It was just purely learning experience, which is priceless, because now we know what we know, and we can move forward. And now we also
know, as you will see in other videos to come, what makes sense economically to invest your time and effort in on the animal front, and why. Of course, with the caveat that economics are not the be all and end all, because as you had a really good point before we sat down to do this, when we looked at the cow numbers, the economics of the cattle. It all depends too how priceless the product is, i.e. if from a Jersey that for 4 gallons of milk a day is absolutely priceless, then it may be worth the feed cost, the logistics of getting it bred, and we just kind of snowball from there. That's a question you have to ask yourself.
Exactly.
So on that note,
we're wrapping it up. I should have done a grand total of debt on what we spent on the big animals, but I did not, and my brain doesn't work that fast. But in an upcoming video, we'll wrap up just how much at the end of this series, we will wrap it up with how much we spent on the homestead this year.
How things balanced out. Or didn't.
Or didn't.
So stay tuned. We think chickens will probably be next.
Yep.
And
chickens.
we'll continue going from there.
Yep.